Hello, everyone. Today I wanted to talk about church music. Now, church music is somewhat subjective, and many people will have preferences about what they think their church ought to be doing. Across North America, there's a wide variety that people will encounter as they engage in local Christian worship centers and find churches. But it's important to have a little bit of a philosophy about church music and what you should expect when you gather together. Now, my philosophy kind of stems from this ancient practice or ancient principle that we see that's known throughout church fathers. It's the Latin for this is lex orandi, lex credendi. And what that means is the Latin for that is basically just translates into the law of prayer is the law of belief. Basically, it talks about this basic human principle of you believe what you pray. By the time you pray something, you feel it so deeply that that's really what you believe. Now, as a result, there's this symbiotic relationship between what you believe, what you pray, in such a way that you want to be careful sometimes. What are the things that you pray regularly? This is why Jesus gives us that famous model prayer, what we call the Lord's Prayer, because it encapsulates what we should have believed at the time, and we continue that to this day. Most Christians can recite the Lord's Prayer. But this idea of lex orandi, lex credendi, the law of prayer is the law of belief. What you pray is so embedded within you that it really reflects what you believe, and so as a result, you want to be careful of what you regularly pray as well. I mean, we even have, to that end, many traditions, liturgical traditions, specifically mine, has what's referred to as a Book of Common Prayer, a repository of faith that is derived almost entirely from Holy Scripture in terms of prayers that are offered to God, both in a formal way, in a manner in which we gather together, so that you're not always having to come up with something on the fly, which frequently can take you sometimes far afield of what you actually want to believe. Nevertheless, this idea of the law of prayer, the law of belief, applies to church music in that you have to think about, I add to that principle of that you believe what you pray, to understand that you also pray what you sing. In other words, yes, to again say it again, you believe what you pray, but you pray what you sing. So therefore, what you sing when you gather together, specifically in Christian worship, had better be something that you pay attention to, that you are purposeful about, and that you don't just give yourself over to sentimentality or what sometimes we refer to as sloppy agape. You really want to express your love to God so much that you are imprecise in your language and wind up actually sometimes singing things that don't reflect the faith that you want to preserve. Well, our nation's history, American history, has a long history of wonderful hymns of the faith that really reflected the beauty and wonders of God and our responses back to Him. With the great lyrics of those hymns, the hymnody was something that expressed our hearts and our joy and our devotion. But in the 20th century, that started to change over time, where supposed quote-unquote worship music creators, like, for example, the likes of Chris Tomlin. Later on in the last 20 years, you have seen people like Bethel Music and Hillsong that have gotten so steeped into the sentimentality of how people feel at any given moment that it became purveyors of church music that actually teach a lot of heresy. And in many ways, the breakdown of American Christian orthodoxy it correlates strongly with this radical change in church music for many, because people sing those things which, quite frankly, oftentimes goes far afield of what it is they really want to believe. As a result, it behooves any Christian tradition to think seriously about what it is you sing. So you sing those things which actually reflect what you want to believe, what you think you ought to believe, what the faith that you want to take comfort in the ups and downs of life. You don't want your music to reflect how you feel in the moment. You actually want your music to reflect the beauty and majesty and the wonder and steadfastness of God and the security of His relationship to you, even throughout all the different mood swings that we are subject to sometimes. So That's why in my previous context, when I was a pastor, I coordinated closely with the music director so that we knew that what was being sung was very much in coordination with the faith that we want to know, that we want to teach the rest of the time. You don't want your music stand and your pulpit to be at odds with one another, which can happen sometimes when, say, for example, the pastor is preaching about togetherness and looking out for one another in the faith, and all those ways in which it's not about me, it's about we. And then, of course, you're singing songs that are all full of first-person personal pronouns about I, me, and mine. And the great triumph of rugged individualism is being expressed in musical form. Well, there's no way you're going to be able to compete with that. I used to tell the music director, I mean, make no mistake, people don't hum my sermons. And so you don't want your music and your preaching and to be in conflict like that. So for us, you want to maintain boundaries on what it is you're going to sing. Now, those boundaries can be arbitrary sometimes, but you got to start somewhere. And I come from a tradition that uses a hymnal that was published in 1940 as the repository music for which we consider to be acceptable music for singing when we gather together. Now, people will say, well, those hymns are great, but I actually have musical preferences that go beyond that. Fine, your personal preferences are fine, but that's why God created iTunes, so that you can indulge personal preferences away from the gathering. When we're all together, we have to set those boundaries on what we are going to sing when we are in one place. And that's why we want to because again, you believe what you pray and you pray what you sing. Well, you don't just want to sing those things that reflect the faith, you actually want to sing them well. And so as a result, many churches go through painstaking processes to make sure that they are supplied with skilled musicians or have good music with which to sing too. This reminds me going back to the Old Testament, say book of First Chronicles, when King David was assembling all the resources together that would go into temple worship. And from 1 Chronicles chapter 25, where we see in verses 6 and 7 that all these were under the supervision of their fathers. They were musicians in the Lord's temple, playing cymbals and stringed instruments as they served in God's temple. And they were under the king's personal supervision, and they and their relatives, all of them were skilled and trained to make music to the Lord. So you want people that are trained. You want people that can do this well, because holy shoddy is still shoddy. And if it's worth doing for God in reflecting your relationship to God when you gather together, it's worth doing well. So as a result, you really want to think purposefully about church music. How are you going to go about this? What you're going to sing? Many people will get hung up on the manner in which it's sung. I mean, what are acceptable instruments? What's the accepted form in which this music should take? Well, that's where we need to think about the blessed variety in the church, because many are convinced that there are organs in heaven. And I love organ music. I'll play it all day long. However, we have in the Bible, we have cymbals and stringed instruments and tambourines and instruments of all types. And I would say that it's more important what you sing than it is the instrumentation or even the arrangements, how it's sung. Make sure it's singable. Make sure it can get embedded in people's hearts, because you want them singing and making melody to their hearts to the Lord as they go about their day. But in preferences, given the choice, I would much rather sing orthodox music that reflects the Christian faith to just rudimentary instruments than singing heresies that are accompanied by a pipe organ of Westminster Abbey. That's a kind of a false dichotomy. We could use organs all day long, but given that choice, it's more important what you sing than how you deliver it, because otherwise people aren't really allowing the power of the music to reinforce their faith as they should. And be purposeful about it as you go, so that when you engage worship together in the church where you attend, you can fully give yourself over to worshiping God and have it reflecting the faith that you know you should be preserving, and you know that the faith is you should instinctively gravitate to in times of trouble, because it's embedded in your mind through the beauty of music. That's all I have for today. God bless you. If you enjoyed this content, please hit like and subscribe, and we will keep it up.